Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country, around the world, there are many more of you that are probably angry this week after the recent developments and the debate, which we will get into. But we've got a perfect guest to help us break down the debates, this moment in time, the divisions in our country, leadership, and many other things. I am very grateful to have joining us today the great and powerful Governor Christine Todd Whitman. Hello, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I mentioned we've never actually met in person when we were warming up. I felt like we may have at some kind of first responder or a tri-state area thing, but
Done.
I think you've been such an important leader, especially in the Northeast and the tri-state region, but obviously nationally. You've broken so much ground, and you're really a person that's deep in the arena right now at this moment. So I'm really grateful that you could join us. But the first question I want to ask you, I've been asking everyone, is where are you and how are you? How are you doing with this pandemic and everything else that's happening?
Fortunately, I'm very well, and I'm lucky to be in this kind of a bubble. I'm on the farm on which I grew up. It's where I live. And so I have all nice fresh vegetables and fruit, and even the animals. What's in the freezer is from the farm. The really nice thing about it is the kids and grandkids are all within easy reach. So I get to see them a lot because we have our own family bubble, as it were. So it's been pretty easy for me, actually. I have to say I'm spoiled in that. I can't imagine what it'd be like if I'd been in an apartment in New York and not able to get out at all. But being here is I can take nice long walks in the woods, and that's refreshing, to say the least.
Can I ask you, ma'am, because one of the things we've talked a lot about is parenting in the pandemic. I've got little ones, you've got grandkids. You must be an incredible role model for them, and you've got them near or around you. Can I ask you, how do you talk to these times, about these times with them? And how do you break down this moment? And what's that been like to be a grandparent and one who understands with such experience what's happening on the larger scale?
Well, fortunately, their parents talk to them a lot about it too, because obviously they've gone back to school now, and that was very concerning for everybody because of the precautions they had to have, shields, face masks, distancing. It's tough for kids. I mean, my grandchildren range in age from 15 to 3. And so there's a host of different challenges being faced by the parents. One of the things my daughter figured out very early on, when we were really all separated and people didn't come together with one another, and actually I was in Arizona at that point, and she decided that really I should home teach part of her day, take her kids off for part of the day. So interesting enough, one of the things I did for the older boys is a book called Forged by Crisis, which everything from Shackleton to Abraham Lincoln, and it showed how they made critical decisions. And I got them to read some of those chapters, and then we discussed how are we facing this pandemic and how did this fit in, and was this part of a dialogue that they could understand. With the little ones, I've always talked to them about the environment, and so we talk about it a little bit that way. But for the most part, the serious discussion, the daily discussions take place with their families.
You mentioned that you're at the farm you grew up on. I want to kick it off by asking you, when you were growing up in New Jersey, I assume on that same farm, a question we ask of all our guests. You were teasing it for me a little bit when we were before we hit record here, but we would normally be doing this at the Classic Car Club in New York. Now we're doing it virtually. But Governor, what was your first car?
My first car was actually a 1949 Ford truck. My brothers found it somewhere. They were 8 and 10 years older than I, and they loved to tinker with cars and rebuild cars. So they found this old truck, because you were allowed to have a farmer's license earlier than a normal learner's permit, as long as you were supposedly on farm business. So you just loaded a bale of hay in the back or a dozen eggs and drove around. And so they gave me, I called him Napoleon, my car. They retrofitted it and made it work. And that was the first car.
Wow. What color was it, ma'am?
He was blue, robin's egg blue.
Robin's egg blue.
And he had 2 neat lights right on top of the hood, but the state police maybe take them off because you're not allowed to have those here unless you're part of emergency response.
Even after you've been governor? Or that was before?
No, by that time, right? Napoleon was long gone. And I didn't have that on any of my other cars.
Did you tell me you had another kind of car that you wanted that you were
Oh
sharing? I
yes,
missed.
my husband and I lived in England for a while, and John was a big car buff. We did have a Bentley over there, but then when we got back to this country for a birthday present, he surprised me. He found a Tickford 3-position drop head coupe, and it was the proper situation, the left-hand drive, and so I had that one here. Belle Epoque, I called her. She was a beautiful car and just wonderful. The trouble is, you couldn't drive her in the winter. Those cars were not exactly made for that. And here in New Jersey, when you have QQ tags, because this was a 56, you can't drive it anywhere except supposedly to and from rallies. So while I loved it and we had it for a while, she was sold too.
Wow. And I have to ask, what color was that one, ma'am?
That one was a cream color with maroon trim.
Excellent.
It
Excellent.
was beautiful. I mean, they're baby Bentleys, and it was just a beautiful, fun car to have.
And I love that you've named them all, because that's a tradition in our family. We got a new truck SUV recently, and my boys name all the cars. We just retired a very old Buick that was named Ruby, and now we just brought into the family at the naming of my 5-year-old, Black Jack Thunder. That's the name.
That's a good creative name. I like that name.
He gets the naming rights.
Yeah.
But it's it's an interesting time. We're all trying to spend more time with our families, more time
Right.
outside. I'm glad to talk to someone who's on a farm, because I know that must be such a different experience, juxtaposed to a lot of the urban experiences people are having now. But everywhere, people are having a drink or two for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask another question of all of our guests. Governor Christine Todd Whitman, what is your favorite drink?
A nice glass of red wine, preferably Old Bordeaux if I can afford it. Otherwise, it's just a nice Pinot Noir.
And why is that your favorite, man?
I like a smooth red wine. I mean, I like a full body, but what I don't want is particularly the alcohol. I like the taste. I don't like a buzz. So I really just want a glass of wine with dinner, or maybe a little bit before dinner. And the Pinot Noirs and the Old Bordeaux, well, the Old Bordeaux just have an incredible taste all their own. And I've been fortunate enough to, again, my husband was a big wine connoisseur. And so we had some very, very nice wines. And I grew up with some nice wines too. So I got spoiled early on. And those are very low alcohol content, particularly if they're old, an Old Bordeaux, because the alcohol goes off over time, but the taste stays there, nice full body.
Excellent. Excellent. Our regular listeners, I have to share with everyone that I am going to participate in Sobertober, or Sober October. Is it one of the toughest things we're going to do in a pandemic, but I am writing off alcohol for at least a month. I've been doing all right so far. I'm not pushing it on others, but just want to put it out there in the universe that I am trying to do Sobertober. A lot of other folks are doing it, and I'm going to give it a shot. You may hear more about that in podcasts to come.
Oh, that's good. My daughter has decided to give it up for a year, and she's on day 200 and something. But as she said, who's counting? The trouble is, she started right as the pandemic broke. It was sort of the next day it became a big thing, and she thought, I think I may have done this wrong. But she's been good about it. She's just decided, no, it's not going to have any.
It's a hard time to do it with the pandemic and with
Right.
this president, and after the debate
Yeah.
this week. So we're very fortunate to have you now. You've been in debates, you've done debate analysis. Just right off the top, ma'am, what's your analysis of last night, and what's the impact of last night in your view?
Well, the whole thing was frankly a disaster. It was like watching 10-year-olds in a sand pit. The real loser on that was democracy. You had a lot of people. These are serious times with serious issues, and they really wanted to hear more in-depth analysis by the candidates themselves of what they believed in and what their positions were, and they couldn't get that. The president clearly went in with the idea that he was going to use a phrase, trump everyone else, literally and figuratively. He wanted to dominate. He wanted to domineer. He is a bully, in my opinion, anyway, and he wanted to throw Joe Biden off his game. And fortunately, as far as I'm concerned, he didn't throw him off his game. What he did succeed in doing is not allowing him being Joe Biden, to really outline his position on things. And that's what people want to hear. And watching the two of them go at it, I mean, I understand why Biden got so frustrated and told him to shut up and called him a clown. I wish he hadn't had to do that. But, it gets to a point where when someone is just constantly interrupting you and speaking over you, as I was saying to someone else, I agree with a tweet I saw that if Chris Wallace if it had been a mother who has spent the last several months with coronavirus locked in the house with 3 or 4 kids, she could have handled that. Chris wasn't prepared for it, but that's what it would take. Someone who's been living with young children and during the coronavirus could have handled it. He just couldn't. I mean, the president was not going to allow it to happen. And there were some memorable moments. Unfortunately, they weren't good ones. When the president refused to deny the far right groups and the Proud Boys and actually sent out a wolf. It wasn't even a subtle dog whistle to them. He would stand up and stand ready, or whatever he said, stand back and stand up.
Yep.
It was clearly, I mean, they love it. They've now apparently made it they're putting it on shirts and buttons and things. And that's scary. He wouldn't agree to a peaceful transition, although Joe Biden said absolutely he would not declare victory until the election had been certified, and he would do through the normal channels. This has been anything but a normal presidency, which in and of itself is okay, that's fine, except my real fear is the undermining of democracy, the disregard of the Constitution, the ignoring of the rules of law. And one of the strong things last night was, to my mind, is when Joe Biden tried to talk about the military. If he's president, there's no way he is not going to be on Putin's case on the news that we have that the Russians put a bounty on American troops. Trump has admitted he never brings that up with Putin because Putin led off one conversation denying it. And of course, he believes everything Putin says. And he has never mentioned that I have ever seen anything about the Russian troops that drove their Humvee into American troops and injured some in Syria. He has never said a word about that. Now, there's no way Joe Biden would countenance something like that. And when he was trying to talk about Hunter, talking about Bo, when Biden was talking about Bo and the president interjected with Hunter and called him, brought out that he was on drugs. You want to say, you're president of the United States, bringing families in like that. First of all, the former vice president was trying to talk about his hero son, frankly, as sacrifice and what it means to the men and women who serve in our military. And he didn't want to hear that because he's been so bad on that, frankly. And he went straight to trying to bring out the worst, thinking this is really going to upset the vice president. I think when Biden looked at the camera and said, my son has a drug problem, just like so many of yours, and he's fighting it, and I'm proud of my son. I think that was a strong moment for him, at least.
I want to go deeper if I can with you on this, ma'am, because I think we have to unpack it, and you're the right person to do it. I mean, there's a lot of outrage today, a lot of pearl clutching today, right? I mean, folks saying, this is so outrageous what he did, but this is who he is. Right. I've called him President Mayhem. I've said he's like a political suicide bomber. And last night was maybe the best example of how that is actually, in my view, part of his strategy. He went in to blow it apart, to get everyone off their game, to dominate the conversation, to disrupt Joe Biden. And I maybe we disagree on this one. I really felt like Joe Biden was a quarterback who never got in his rhythm. Like every time he'd step back to get hit, it was like J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald both coming at him at the same time. Sure. He never got any momentum. And he really... No,
that's where Trump succeeded last night. He didn't succeed in making Biden look old or senile, which is what he was really after. But he did make it impossible for Biden to ever get a coherent, constant message out. Nobody could be constant or coherent. I mean, how do you do that with somebody yapping at you in your ear constantly? But what was interesting to me, I don't know if you saw it, I was watching it on CNN, and Rick Santorum, who's been a very strong Trump supporter all the way through, even he said that was over the top, that the president was over the top in this debate.
I think the thing that shocked me actually was that Biden wasn't better prepared for that. I mean, I honestly feel like that's what I would have anticipated. That's what he should have anticipated. And it felt like he never had a way to parry it, right? And maybe in the next, if there is another debate, he can agree to different rules or, negotiate differently before he even steps on the stage. But I don't think he looks strong. I mean, he could have looked stronger. He could have taken the momentum. He could have every single time, even the time when he tried to make the case about the Russian bounties and he started to talk about Bo, Trump would pull him off course. And I really think that Trump's lack of discipline is always on display. Maybe it's the most concerning part for me as someone who cares about national security is his consistent lack of discipline, but he was disciplined in continuing to disrupt Biden. He never let Biden get going, and he really manipulated the conversation and steamrolled Chris Wallace, and that's kind of what he does all the time. So maybe one question I want to ask you, because you've been in these positions, the bigger outcomes I think are important that we have to talk about, in particular, the refusal to accept the peaceful transition if he loses. But should Biden do another debate? Should he go into this next, in your view, in your political calculation? Of course, if he doesn't, Trump's going to say, you're a wimp, you're running from me. But if that was bad for democracy, if it was bad for America and we're all collateral damage, is there not a case to be made that Biden should be the bigger man and say, let's not blow this all up again, and I'm not going to take this bait?
Well, but, and honestly, had he done that last night, he never would have been able to say a word. And that's what Trump was really hoping for. Every time he tried to bring it back to the question that Chris Wallace had asked. And frankly, Chris, I know it was an impossible situation, but he didn't even start to try to stop the president from the get-go. He waited, it was 15 or 20 minutes in before he first started to jump on him and say, hey, cut it out. And so by that time, he'd lost completely. And yes, you're absolutely right. Biden did not get to make a coherent case on any one of the particular issues because he was stopped every time. And Trump is just going to talk louder, and he's just going to keep talking louder, and you can descend into that with him. And that would, to my mind, would have been the worst thing had Biden tried to out-Trump Trump. Nobody's going to out-Trump this man in the chaotic way he approaches things. And as you point out, the lack of discipline, which is really scary, particularly when you talk about national security issues. And they didn't get into what I was hoping that they were going to get into. Chris finally did ask one question about climate change, because to my mind, that's a national security threat as well as a immediate domestic threat. And Trump didn't want to talk about it, so he just wouldn't talk about it. Biden tried, but there was no immediate fact checking. And apparently, I don't know if this is true or not. I haven't investigated it because somebody told me this just today, that apparently the FCC rules for these debates do not allow the moderator or anybody to have a microphone that you can mute.
Right.
Because in the next debate, I mean, I'm serious, in the next debate, the moderator ought to start off by saying anybody who, because there were rules. I mean, both camps had agreed to a set of rules that Trump immediately threw out the door. To say, if you keep interrupting and blowing away the rules, I'm going to mute your mic.
Yeah. Well, that's honestly where I think Trump won before it even started. I mean, if I were advising Joe Biden, I never would have agreed to a Fox moderator. I never would have agreed to those rules. I would have pushed harder for ways that would try to at least offset what you knew would be his strategy. So I mean, I honestly feel like Democrats are always trying to take the high road. They're always trying to show their character, but they also get beat up pretty badly along the way. And that's been for the last 2 decades of politics in America, right? Democrats are always right, and Republicans are often winning. And so this higher ground may not be sustainable when you're dealing with a guy who doesn't honor anything.
No, that's true.
Any institution. So let me ask you.
But you don't know. The only thing I will say is you don't know if they didn't try to negotiate that.
Sure.
And they have to have these debates. That's one of the requirements, the 3 debates. So
yeah, we could Monday morning quarterback it all day long.
Oh,
but
yes.
I think it was 40 minutes before Biden came out with the taxes. He didn't hit him on the losers and suckers. They're winning haymaker shots that he can land.
Right.
Because he was so off balance, in my view, and he was so stifled, and he felt like he couldn't get a word in edgewise. His whatever his game plan was probably went out the window, which is exactly what you want to happen if you're Trump. And maybe the big takeaway for me that I'm glad you talked about was the Proud Boys moment, when he said to them, "Stand by," right? And now they're running with that. I think that is a huge takeaway. But the other one that I hope you can help us project for, Trump does what he says. He always does what he says. right? He may be a liar, but when he says something he's going to do in policy or politics, he generally does it. And he said last night he will not accept the results of the election. So he said that. I think that is the biggest takeaway, is that he's telegraphing what he's going to do. And now the real question for Biden is, are you going to go tactical and worry about the next debate? Or are you going to start to have this conversation with the American people about what we're going to do if he loses? We all know he loses and he won't go. So that really frames up for me what I've described as, people are thinking November 3rd is the end of the fourth quarter. I think it's the end of the third quarter, and we may be looking at a couple of overtimes that could go into next spring. So where you sit as a strategist with all your experience, how do we right now as Americans, and how does Joe Biden prepare for what we think is now probably inevitable? Trump will not accept the results on November 3rd. So what should we be strategically planning for November 4th and beyond? All Americans, not just Democrats, but many of our listeners who are Republicans, independents. I'm an independent myself. How do we think strategically, even if, frankly, the Democratic Party isn't?
Well, it's happening right now. I mean, the Biden campaign, I don't know, because as chairman of Republicans and Independents for Biden, we don't coordinate with the campaign at all. We're separate, so I can't do that. But I know Nancy Pelosi is starting right now with members of Congress. And how are you going to handle this if he refuses to leave office? What are going to be the challenges to the Congress? Where do they step in? And I am sure that the Biden team lawyers are doing the same thing. And I was glad to see the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that they were not going to get involved in this. It's not their role. We don't want that. That's what happens in third world countries, that the military takes over and has to escort the president out. Leave that to the local the local law enforcement to get him out of the office. If Trump loses and it's a big enough margin, I don't think we're going to have that problem. His supporters will. I mean, he's talking about getting them out in the street, but the majority of Americans are not going to accept that. And they're going to be putting pressure on their local leaders and on their representatives to shut it down right away, and to have the police forces ready to stop the demonstrators if they get out there with their guns. Because that's what, I mean, he was the assistant secretary at health, at the Department of Health. If he was the chief of public relations officer, who's now left, but who said, we got to be ready with our guns for this election. That's what scares me to death. But that's where everybody has to be working on, and it has to happen at the state level and the local level, because the president controls the federal response to this. And the Congress has to know when they can step in and where they can step in, and the states have to be ready to combat any kind of disruption in the street. And then, if the sergeant at arms have to go in there and lift him physically out of the White House, which would be a heavy lift, I admit, but they could do it and take him out the door, I believe that we'll see that'll happen. If it's a close election, it's going to be much harder. If it's a really close election where he has some legitimacy in claiming that you can't call it now because there are too many uncounted ballots, or there are too many ballots that didn't come in right on time. I mean, he's doing everything he can right now to disrupt the election. Yeah. He's doing everything he can to undermine people's confidence in the mail-in ballot. Well, as the military has been doing mail-in ballots since Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, and it's been just fine. And many states have been doing nothing but mail ballots. Mm-hmm. So this idea that somehow they're totally corrupt is just not borne out by facts. But the president is convincing people of that. And I must say, I have my ballot here. I've filled it all out. I'm going to take it up, and they don't have the drop box yet, to my local polling place and put it in this particular box. I trust the post office. I'm sure they will get it there, and particularly now it's early enough. But I just want to see how that works. I want to see how easily visible those ballot boxes are. But the other thing he said last night that should warn all of us is when he told his supporters to get out there and go to the polls and watch what's happening.
Right.
For most states, you can't go into the polls unless you're going to vote. Yeah. You can't go in unless you're a certified poll watcher.
Yeah, that's the national security threat right? The domestic security threat that I see, we talked a lot about on this show about how our enemies are celebrating these divisions. So there's a scenario that we could see unfold where last night looks calm compared to what November, December, January could look like in the streets of this country, where, you know, hypothetically Proud Boy groups are going down to voting polls to intimidate people. And we have a period of violence, tension, unrest that could, you know, flow all the way into Q1 of next year. So he's always had a strategy of undermining institutions, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, the military, the post office, the media, any institution that he can undermine for his own advantage, he will. And he's doing that now at the election. But he also, in many ways, has completely undermined and blown apart the Republican Party. So I wanted to ask, since I've got you with us now, what does the Republican Party do now and into January? And what is the future of the Republican Party? Scenario one, he wins. We can probably understand what that looks like. Scenario two, what happens? Does the Republican Party fragment into 5 or 6 pieces? And where do people like you go? Do you stay inside and try to pull this back to the party of Lincoln that you have represented, you know, proudly for decades? Or is there another option? There are many folks, 40% of the country is unaffiliated. They're looking for alternatives. Can you play out for us what you would do or what you plan to do yourself with those scenarios as a Republican?
Well, if Trump wins, the party is Trump. And as I think we may have talked about before we came on the air, there is no Republican Party right now, because the fact that the Republicans didn't even try to adopt a platform at the convention says that we don't have any central principles. It's whatever Trump says we are, that's what we are. Whatever he says he stands for, that's what we stand for. And that's not the definition of a credible party. That's that's a personal thing. It's just not what we are. So if he were to win, if he wins and if he holds the Congress, or at least the Senate, and doesn't get back many seats in the House, that is going to define the word Republican, the title Republican, which means that people such as myself and those Republicans and independents that we have now as part of our and Eyes for Biden are going to be looking for how to come together. And there are other groups not part of the Ours and Ours for Biden right now, but there are other groups of Republicans who are saying, okay, let's figure out how do we put together another party? What does it look like? It'll have to be a third party. And, you know, the Republican Party started as a third party with Lincoln against slavery. So it's not that it hasn't happened before. If Trump loses, and loses the Senate, then the current group of quote unquote Republicans becomes much more marginalized. Yes, unfortunately, they will have them in the House. We'll have QAnon supporters in the House, because right now what's happened is the conservatives have gone after all the kind of thinking, I like to say, Republicans, the moderate Republicans, and have been forcing them out. And so we're going to be left with crazies, left with the extreme people in the party, but they're going to be marginalized. And that's going to give an opening for us to take back the name and label Republican. But otherwise it'll have to come from a different angle.
So there's this group, right, of the Hughes and the Kasichs and the Tom Ridges and this group of people that have been, you know, trying to, you know, form this internal push and to try to speak, you know, some sense as Republicans. But I mean, if he wins and that scenario unfolds, do you still call yourself a Republican? I mean, you personally.
I don't know. Not if it's defined.
There'll be a wave of people who say, I'm no longer a Republican, I am something else? Or
yes, I think that I probably would then. Yeah. I probably would then. I stuck with it now because I believe the country is stronger with 2 parties. We're not set up in the model of a parliamentarian model where they're multi-parties. We're just too big, too diverse, too many layers of government for that to work. Yes, we have an independent in the Senate. Yes, we have people who are unaffiliated in Congress, but those are very few. But I'm not a Trumper, and Trump controls the party. And were he to win re-election, that's what the party would be. And I can't be part of that because he is, I believe, destroying democracy. He
Yeah, I
is
mean,
undermining all those institutions of government. I'm sure he's never read the Constitution. He just looks on it as an inconvenient document,
yeah.
piece of paper that gets in his way from time to time. But he's blown through all the norms. And now the court is going to be, we're going to see a court that is going to, I'm afraid, uphold so many of his more controversial decisions, because particularly with this latest appointee, she may be very qualified and bright and a wonderful woman with 7 kids or whatever, but she also has shown a predilection for overturning precedent. It's also going to make it very awkward because in some of those decisions, she has been quite vocal about John Roberts and been against decisions where he was in the majority. So that's going to make it awkward. But he's also going to lose control because now there are going to be six certified conservatives on the Supreme Court, and they only need 5 to win every single argument. And these people that Trump has appointed seem to have been appointed simply because they're conservative, not for their jurisprudence, not for whether they've written a lot of opinions, whether they've been overturned or not. Are they clear in how they communicate those opinions? It's been just about loyalty to party. And that's not what the Supreme Court or any court should be about.
Yeah, I mean, when I call him a political suicide bomber, sometimes suicide bombers take out targets that are intended to, or that maybe do benefit their objectives. And on some levels, you know, if he does blow everything up, I think there are many independents who would like to see a legitimate third party, who would like to see a place for affiliated and independents to go. I feel like if Bush had lost, against Gore, the Republican Party may have fragmented at that point, but it was able to stay together for, whatever extended period of time. Now we're at this inflection point again, but I think there are many people who don't see a home in either party. It's for many folks, right. It feels like it's either, Donald Trump or AOC. And a lot of this show is about giving voice to those people who, put country above party. And
exactly.
And I think that may be, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. And maybe that is an opportunity for us to reevaluate, in my view, what is a broken 2-party system that in part led to this situation. But we're going to be hoping for folks like you to lead the way. You've always been a voice of reason, a voice of moderation. This is Angry Americans, and we say if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. There's plenty to be righteously angry about. So,
yes.
Governor Christine Todd Whitman, what makes you angry?
What I see happening to the country today, what I see is undermining our basic values, the thing that make this such an extraordinary country. I hearken back to what Benjamin Franklin said when asked what kind of a country that the founding fathers had given us, and he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And how Abraham Lincoln said very early on, if we lose our democracy, it will be from within. And that's what we're witnessing, and that's what scares me to death and makes me really angry. This man isn't worth it. This man does not have the right to turn this country upside down, and we can only blame ourselves if we let him get away with it.
You have a lot of support on that one for sure, growing by the minute. As I think I'm a first responder. We've covered 9/11 first responders issues on this show. I know that you've been vocal in the last few years about your time around 9/11, but I have to, on behalf of the community,
Sure.
Every opportunity I get to bring this up with you. I was down there on 9/11. I remember hearing the message from the government. I didn't know who that was at the time. Folks saying, hey, the air is clear. We're just past the 19th anniversary of 9/11. We're going into the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Knowing that a lot of first responders listen to this show and may be upset with you personally as a leader, do you have a message for them now that you want them to hear?
Absolutely. I mean, we acted in good faith with the knowledge that we had at the time. There was nothing I ever said in answering the questions that was not informed by a conversation that very morning with the scientists and those up at Region 2, which is in New York, New Jersey, and the Virgin Islands. And my problem is, and where I went wrong, is the question asked of me was always, is the ambient air quality in Lower Manhattan in general safe to breathe? And the answer that I was given every day by the scientists was yes. We see nothing there that tells us there'll be long-term problems in Lower Manhattan in general. But And I answered this, I added this at the end every time, but the first responders, those on the pile, had to wear respirators. And we had, as you may remember, you may have seen them, we had people on the pile every day wearing monitors to get real-time air evaluations, and they went up to a number of first responders saying, wear your mask. We set up that wash station for the trucks so that they wouldn't be carrying the dust and dispersing the dust throughout the city when they went out to the dump. That first aid station, well, the Red Cross, where the Red Cross had food and there was a wash ability for you to leave your clothes and boots and things, that was EPA setting that up. I mean, we did everything we could with the knowledge we had at hand. I hope that we have learned a lot since then. And if what we're seeing since then scientifically tells me that, in fact, we were wrong and the science was wrong to say that in general in Lower Manhattan, the air quality was not good, then that is a mistake, but we didn't have the tools to know that at the time. My son lived down there. I never told him to move. I would have if I thought for an instant that what I was saying wasn't right or wasn't accurate. I would have told him to move, and I would have told everybody else too, but I didn't, because that's what I was told by the scientists, and I believe the scientists. And I don't know, frankly, whether, it's hard to know whether people who live in and around that area in general, if their cancers are due to it. I absolutely believe that what we're seeing with first responders is due to the air they were breathing. The problem was EPA did not have the authority to enforce the wearing of masks. The city had that authority because they were in charge of the site. It's just like putting out the fire. We started arguing because there were meetings every morning at EPA headquarters, or I'm not exactly sure where they met, between the city and the state, EPA, and some other healthcare, and the leaders of some of the first responders in the city particularly. And every time we went through that, that's when our people said, first responders need to wear protective gear, but we didn't have that authority. The city was the only one. So,
I got to tell you, ma'am, I never got that word. And I think I wouldn't even have known where to get a respirator down then, right? It was kind of chaos. But I think
right. It was chaos.
What that moment was outrageous, and the handling afterward was outrageous. But maybe what's more outrageous is that we're still fighting for benefits, right? That we had to fight for.
Oh, that's inexcusable.
We had to fight for the extension. We've used the hashtag on this show a lot. My friends are dying. We had Rob Serra on a few weeks ago. He's a 9/11 first responder, a firefighter who's dying. I've said before that I think there's a good chance I'll die from my 9/11 exposures. If not that, maybe burn pits in Iraq. But there's a chance it could happen to me and to others. Mm-hmm. How do we get this focus now, right? Trump, as an example, never helped. He didn't focus on the issue. He didn't bring it up. It's not a priority really for either party, except at times. How do we fix this going forward so that we don't have to worry about our kids? How do we make sure that we don't need Jon Stewart to go down there and ring the bell again? Because we are repeating the mistake with burn pits, with toxin exposures in Iraq and Afghanistan. The VA has now denied 78% of burn pit claims at the VA already. So it feels like it's repeating. And I'm asking you, not because I want to do a gotcha or anything else, but because I think you're in a unique position to help. So how do you think we can really finally fix this? And how can you be a part of that so that we don't have to have Jon Stewart every 12 months go down there and shame the hell out of everybody?
Well, I've spoken out. Every time I'm asked, I said, I think that there's no question, but the first responders who are getting sick because of what they were exposed to, and that we have a responsibility to ensure that they don't have to worry about getting the health care they need and that their families will be protected. But it's this kind of long battle that we've had. I mean, the military just recently in the last maybe 5 years, has admitted that Agent Orange actually was something that was bad. And those troops who were exposed to Agent Orange over in Vietnam are dying and have been dying because of that exposure. It is something we have to keep hammering at. It is something that, for instance, it's another area where I think Joe Biden would be one of the primary supporters of that and draw people's attention to the fact we shouldn't be going through this argument every year. This is something that should be automatic. There should be enough funding put aside to say that those first responders are the ones that need to be taken care of. I mean, how can you expect people to respond to the next crisis like this, and God willing, we never have one, if if they don't feel that somebody's got their back. We have to have your back. Now, if EPA made a mistake on all that stuff, that shows we didn't know what we were doing, I guess. But we just, at that point in time, nobody had ever seen anything like this, and we didn't have all the information. But that's not an excuse not to help the people who are suffering now. You admit the mistake, or you admit whatever it is. You say, okay, if that's what happened, that's what happened, and we need to help these people because it's just what's right.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you on that. Maybe if you end up having to create and potentially lead that third party, maybe we can make it a priority in the party's agenda. And I think that's the sort of thing that would unify people. It sends the right message. It's about patriotism. Mm-hmm. It's about public health. It's about national security. And I agree with you. Joe Biden said openly that he thinks that Beau Biden's cancer may have been caused by burn pits. So there's an opportunity with him going forward. But maybe you and I could find ways to work together, no matter who wins, to keep it a priority for both parties.
I would love to do that.
I really think it is a conscience calling moment. Mm-hmm. And I wish it was over, but I know that we're going to continue to lose people, and we're going to continue to have this fight going forward. But I appreciate you tackling it. You're deep in the trenches now with this new group that's affiliated with the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project has kind of become this rock star group. They're like and provocative, effective, controversial. We'll see, right? They remind me of the Swift Boat Vets for Truth, right? When the Swift Boat Vets came out and hit John Kerry, and they're always political attack groups that evolve for the situation and kind of get the spotlight and potentially have an influence. But I also wonder if it's a group that's running a lot of ads that Democrats really love to hear. Democrats really love to hear Republicans saying this, but are they actually moving anybody? Are they moving people in swing states? Are they moving undecideds? Are they what's the tactical and strategic plan for the Lincoln Project to actually help Joe Biden win beyond the ads that we see and all the tweets? How do you think strategically and tactically they will actually move the needle? What needle will they move, and how will they do it?
Well, I can speak for the Republicans Independents for Biden. We're going to be spending $10 million on outreach and on ads for Ours and Eyes for Biden. And our whole focus is on those Republicans and independents who will not vote for Trump, but just have a real problem voting for a Democrat. To show them that there are people that they respect, their opinion leaders in their various states, national opinion leaders who say it's okay. It's time to put country ahead of party. It's okay to pull this lever. We're very focused on the particular states that are the target states that everybody has with running those. We're getting our members who are listed on the steering committee, who are opinion leaders in individual states. We're getting them to write op-eds and placing those, trying to get them on local radio stations, doing lots of tweets, because that seems to be the world today. I mean, that's beyond my capabilities. I do have someone, I tell her what to tweet, and then she does it because I couldn't possibly cope with that. But so we're being very targeted in what we're doing, and that's moving. The idea is you need to move between 2 and 3% of the Republicans who voted for Trump the last time to win this in a way that is substantive and will make it more difficult than ever for him to contest the election. And that's what we're aiming for. The real concern and the real question is people have got to vote. I mean, we know the Trump supporters are passionate. They will vote. And I think it's a good sign. I was watching, 2 weeks ago when Virginia started their first early voting, and you had lines of people. You had exactly what we were talking about earlier, of that sort of threatening behavior of pro-Trumpers standing around and making noises there. And so the authorities sent out others, and I don't know whether they were plainclothes policemen or actual policemen or what it was, to help protect those who were standing in line, to move them to a different place so that the counter demonstrators, as it were, couldn't get to them. But there was a commitment on the part of these people to vote and to stand up and do it even when there were those who were trying to intimidate them and make it difficult. So that's what we've got to do. We have got to convince people, if there never was a time that you voted, this is the time to vote. Make sure you're registered and vote. And that's the other thing we have on the Lincoln Project too, and there are a number of other sites that are up and around that will show you what's happening in your state, when you the last minute to register, where your polling places are, when they open, what you can do, whether it's mail-in or not, getting all that information out as much as possible and targeting those who are just don't know quite what they want to do, and particularly young people. But the passion has to be on the side of those, and I'd phrase it, those who want to defend the Constitution, to get out there and be just as passionate about their support for Joe Biden as the other side is for Donald Trump.
Well, I'm rooting for you. And I think, I've said that Trump is like Godzilla. I mean, he's just destroying everything in his path. And I'm in favor of anything that can take a chunk out of Godzilla, whether it's the Lincoln Project or Joe Biden or, whatever it is. We got to take him down politically and start to rebuild Tokyo after Godzilla is gone. And I'm rooting for the Lincoln Project, and I'm rooting for others, but I also, hearing you talk specifically about the metric that you can quantify, how many people, because this is the great conversation in media, is this elusive, undecided, moderate voter, knowing exactly how many people that actually is, and is there a strategy to move them? If this was a military, would say, okay, how many members of Al Qaeda are in the region? How much ammunition do we need to eliminate them, to change them, to move them? And to hear you kind of walk through that analysis is interesting. But I also think there's a lot of unknowns. So we're going to need leaders who can go above that and who can express the right kind of leadership and the right kind of tone. And so I do appreciate the tone that you've been adding to the conversation, especially in these times, especially when our country's under fire. You seem to always manage a balance somehow, despite the chaos. So a question we also ask of our guests, Governor Christine Todd Whitman, what makes you happy?
My grandkids. When I get all 7 of them in one place, that's what really makes me happy. I mean, that's the future. That's why one of the reasons why I care as much as I do. I only wish my husband were around to enjoy it too. He saw all of the 6 boys, but he missed the little girl. She came after he died. So unfortunately, he didn't ever see Pepper, who's appropriately named because she is a pistol since she's Pepper. But it's family. It's about connections. It's friendships. It's reaching out to one another. That's the kind of thing. Community, basically. I mean, I get it in my church. I get it, but I get it particularly with family.
And I want to ask you if you can just go one step deeper on that, because you've been under fire. You've been the first person, the first woman to do many things in your career. You've broken a lot of ground. I could never imagine your journey, but there have probably been so many times where you've been hit and you've been battered around, and the country feels that way now. Many people listening feel that way now, and you've endured, and now you're in this place where you have a grandkids and you have a mission, and you're helping others. What's your advice to the people who are deep in the struggle and pain right now, ma'am?
This is just keep caring. This is an incredible country, and I have ultimate faith in the American people. I mean, we really have been through some tough times before. We're not in a shooting war yet, as we were in the Civil War. I worry that there are going to be pockets of that, and this president is encouraging, but that's not who we are. And I think really that what we need to do is take strength in one another and continue to say, this is the kind of country we want. Continue to talk about what's important in our ideals and how what's in the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution means something to us and is important to us. Those are values about which we care, and make sure that our children know. I mean, if there were any kids watching that debate last night, I don't know how they came away with much respect for the process. And I don't want my grandchildren to think that it's okay to bully people, that it's okay to demonize somebody because of how they worship or the color of their skin or where they come from. I mean, here in New Jersey, I used to call us many faces, one family, because we have over 150 different languages spoken in Jersey City alone. And my job as governor was to be governor for all people, not just for the people who voted for me. It was for all people. And I'd go to some places where advisors would say, well, don't go there because they're never going to vote for you. And I said, yeah, but I'm going to be their governor if I win. So I need to get to know these people and let them know that I do care about them. And we need to take comfort in that there are good public servants. There are people who are trying to do this. That we have an extraordinary group of people who are in the military and the first responders, the police, that are doing unimaginable things in the face of these fires, what they're facing out west. Whenever we have a major crisis, we are superb in reacting to those things. I mean, at least our first responders are superb in doing that. We need to support them. We need to support one another and take heart that there will be an end to this one way or another. There'll be an end to this. And we've always been able to find our way out. It's the most perilous time for our country as a democracy, as a democratic republic that I've ever seen. But we can get through it. We can handle it if we do it together.
Well, I appreciate tremendously the leadership example that you set, the command climate that you create, whether it's for your grandkids or the state of New Jersey. I think that I also have to tell you, you're in the fight right now. There are a lot of people who are keeping their powder dry. There are a lot of people who are biting their tongue. I've been very critical of people like General Mattis and General Kelly and others that I think have more to add to the discussion, not just for the election, but for our national security. I think it can get worse. This is a president who has his finger on the nukes, right? We know it can get worse from a national security and a domestic security standpoint, but we're going to need leaders who can speak honestly and candidly and effectively and with honor and dignity and set an example for our kids. So I know
can I ask you a question in that context?
Sure.
When you say Madison Kelly, I don't disagree, especially what's come out in the latest in Rage, in the book Rage, with Bob Woodward's book. But the military has had a tradition of staying out of politics, whether they're in office, wearing the uniform or not. How strongly do those of you who are out of the military feel that should stay? I mean, what damage is done if a Kelly does stand up and say?
It's a great question. We're not a monolith, so I won't, I always start with that.
Right, I know that.
I think this is a really important distinction. There's a difference between General Milley, who is right now still in uniform, still wearing stars, is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's still in the military, and General Kelly. General Kelly took off his uniform, took a political appointment, and in some ways kind of traded on that star, okay? And now wants to have it both ways. And you can't have it both ways, whether it's Mattis or Kelly. Others like Admiral Mullen have continued to speak out, Colin Powell. Once you're out of uniform, I think you have an even greater responsibility because so few people understand the national security stakes and the experience. George Washington once said, when we assume the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to be sec def. but when I'm called upon, Rumsfeld can't pull that card, right? Others can't pull that card. So I think the generals made a decision. If they wanted to keep that when they were retired, then they could have gone off and said nothing. And there are plenty who have done that. But once they have information that could educate the American people about issues of national security, I think they have a moral imperative. And it's not in contrast. I think that we need them now more than ever. And if they didn't want to be political actors, they shouldn't have joined the Trump administration. You've been.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I was just trying to figure out.
I would make.
I don't have my husband to bounce these questions off of as a veteran.
But I've said this before. I think General Milley and Secretary of Defense Esper have allowed themselves to be politicized in a way that is unprecedented and damaging to our military and national security. I think that General Milley did not go far enough. He apologized for allowing himself to be manipulated, but he didn't point the finger at Trump. And he didn't resign. And I think many of them are being a bit too cute and they're pulling their punches and they're saying there's a lot of division out there, but they don't say who causes it. It's like saying there's a lot of terrorism, but not mentioning bin Laden. So I think they have to take it a step further. And I appreciate you asking me that question and giving me a chance to talk about it, because I think you do understand it in a way that is unique. And I think more people need to understand it as well. But I also understand that your time is short and I have to give you some gifts before we leave. I can't do them in real life, so I'll do them virtually. First of all, I'm going to hold it up and you can see it. We've got some Angry Americans merchandise made by the veterans of Oscar Mike. It's very comfortable, made in the USA. We'll get some of that coming your way.
All right.
Also got, it's not a good Bordeaux, but it's the best whiskey in America. we've got Uncle
Well,
Nearest.
I have family members who will enjoy that.
Excellent. Uncle Nearest, 1884. If folks are not drinking this month, it makes a great gift. But Uncle Nearest whiskey, fantastic, has a great backstory. And then the last gift, that is also our Rorschach test of a question. From the beginning, we've asked every guest under the sun. There are 3 colors of Peeps, the Easter candy Peeps. Okay, I know our connection may be good enough for you to see, but there's pink, yellow, and blue. Which color would you pick, Governor, and why?
I'd pick blue because I'm generally a blue person. I mean, it's my favorite color. So.
And it goes back to that pickup truck, right?
Right, exactly. Probably does. Go back to Napoleon.
Well, Napoleon is an interesting name to bring up now, because I don't know what will be Trump's Waterloo. It might be suckers and losers. It might be something else. But in these times where a lot of people are blue, I know you're bringing some inspiration and some hope and a positive example, and you're a patriot. And I really appreciate all that you're doing right now to try to push this country in the right direction. And I'm really grateful for this much time, for you to be candid with me and have this conversation with an audience that I think really needs to hear from you. So thank you.
Well, let me put a plug in too I'm on the board of the National World War II Museum. And if any of you have had an opportunity to go there, or to get family members, or to get others to go there as a way to understand one of the biggest events in the country, in the world's history, and the role that we played, and the difference that it's made, and how we got to this point, because frankly, I'm afraid we've seen a lot of language we're hearing now and behavior we're hearing now we knew about in the 30s, and that didn't end us up in a good place. And we simply can't ignore history. So I put that in. Go to New Orleans, go see an incredible museum, but more for the point of view of understanding the history, and how if you don't know history, you are condemned to repeat it.
I will echo that. That is the best museum I've ever been to.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear you say that.
I've done events there before. I can't wait to take my boys there. They've never been. They're too young, but it is an exceptional place. It really brings history to life. And I'm sure, knowing the museum, if you can't get to New Orleans, there's some great online resources where
they're wonderful online things.
And I know they've had support from Ambrose and Spielberg and Tom Hanks and many others. So my thanks to you for that. And if folks need a little bit of hope and inspiration in times of chaos, the World War II veterans are the greatest generation, and we're going to need a next greatest generation to take us through. So thank you for supporting them, and thank you for all you do, ma'am. Appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care. Keep it up.
Thank you, ma'am. Stay frosted.